Sai Ram. In the last episode, I dealt with the issue of duty and how it should be performed. I pointed out that if the action that duty represents becomes an act of pure love, then the quality of that action is truly divine. If everyone in the world makes an effort to act in this manner, then a good many of our problems would vanish, many of them without any expenditure of money. I mean, how much do you have to spend to really love your mother? Many people might shake their heads and say, this is a lot of nonsense. Well, let me take a minute to discuss that point. These days, there is a lot of talk of terrorism. Yes, terrorists do exist, and there is a problem. I also agree that terrorists would have to be dealt with. But then, can the problem be eliminated simply by hunting terrorists and killing them? If there is a malaria outbreak, obviously those suffering from the fever have to be given medicine. But can malaria be eradicated just by giving medicines? Any sensible person would know that unless the root cause is addressed, there can be no eradication of malaria. This is accepted, and indeed, many problems like malaria are sought to be solved at different levels, all the way down to the basic. This applies to the basic problems of humanity also. Going back to terrorism, often there are fundamental causes like lack of education, employment opportunities, denial of cultural space, and so on, that are responsible for the outbreak of terrorism. Indeed, every major problem, whether it be terrorism or climate change or mass poverty, has always got some basic causes, and if one wants to solve these problems, one must go to the basics. That is what I shall consider next. One thing is clear, whatever the problem, when one digs deeper and deeper, one would find that it all ends up with the human mind. That is where almost all problems start. In the case of the Kurukshetra war, it all started with jealousy and anger in the minds of the Kauravas. In the case of World War II, it all started with some strange notions in the mind of Hitler, and so on. Experts say that today the three major problems facing humanity are: 1. The threat of large-scale conflict, 2. Climate change, and 3. Mass poverty. If we try to trace the root cause for all these three problems, in every case we would end up with the mind. Conflict, whatever it is and wherever it is, has always started with hate, suspicion, fear, anger, and so on. And all these feelings are associated with the mind. A man starts fearing another and begins to be suspicious of this other person. Other person in turn begins to dislike the first person and starts hating him, and thus develops the gulf of suspicion. One thing then leads to another, and soon daggers are drawn. Climate change. There are many direct causes. Cars emitting too much carbon dioxide, too many power plants belching smoke, and so on. Go back a little and you would find it is all the result of humans consuming more and more energy. Go back a little further and you will find it's all due to too many desires. People want 24-hour television. It takes energy to operate the TV, energy to produce programs, energy to broadcast the programs, and so on. And then there is the energy consumed in promoting the shows, marketing the shows, and so on. Of course, in all this, people make money. And once people have money on hand, there is born the desire to travel, which involves more energy consumption. With the money they have accumulated, people also want to buy and consume all sorts of things. Big industries then spring up to satisfy the greed of the consumer. All this takes energy. In short, every single individual makes an energy demand in so many different ways, and all these keep piling up, showing up finally as a huge carbon dioxide burden that is placed on planet Earth. Where does this desire that drives us all crazy spring from? In the mind. Poverty, that too in a sense originates in the mind. When people become excessively greedy, they spend money pandering to unwanted desires. Thus, money that could be spent usefully in uplifting the poor is spent on luxuries, some of them atrociously expensive. Once again, the mind is the culprit. People who are already rich want to become richer. For this, they develop many schemes like creating new factories and so on. Every time they want to start something like this, they want land and water. In some manner or the other, these are taken away from the poor living in the villages, often with paltry compensation. And this makes the poor even poorer. Sometimes land is taken away not for factories, but for building golf courses, for building luxury hotels, for building huge airports, for building big shopping malls, and so on. Every one of these cuts and eats into the tiny space the poor have left, marginalizing them more and more. And when that happens, there is trouble for sure. But where do all these dreams of the rich start? Once again in the mind. So you name it, and it almost invariably starts in the mind. That is why both Krishna and Swami stress so often the importance of keeping the mind, the most powerful gift of God, in the right working condition. Now, since the mind plays such a crucial role, it is necessary to spend some time understanding how the mind gets corrupted, why it gets corrupted, and how to prevent this corruption of the mind. Let us start right at the beginning, that is when God created the universe. Creation has been described in many ways by poets, but modern science gives a good and comprehensive picture that is fully consistent with Vedanta. In this picture, we have the following sequence of events. First, there was what is often called the Big Bang, which signaled the birth of the universe. When it was born, the universe was tiny, but it rapidly expanded, and in it appeared first the simplest atoms, and from the atoms came later huge gas clouds. The clouds then condensed into stars, and in due course our own solar system was formed. Our sun has many planets, but in the third planet, which we call the Earth, God adjusted the conditions so that life could emerge and evolve. Slowly, over hundreds of millions of years, many life forms emerged and evolved, from plants to animals and finally humans. Let us examine a bit more closely some of the stages in the evolution process. We have plants. Plants have life, but they cannot move. After the plants came the animals. Animals have life and could move. Animals also have a brain, which gives them limited powers to decide and to act. For example, when an animal senses danger, it tries to avoid it. From animals have come humans, and they too have slowly evolved from primitive and nomadic beings to very intelligent ones, in stages of course. Science says that this entire process of evolution occurred in the physical universe all by itself. Vedanta says, yes, evolution did occur in the physical universe, that is to say, within the bounds of space and time, but not all by itself. Cosmic destiny present as invisible universal consciousness or the eternal Atma, directed this process of evolution. There is, of course, a purpose why this happened, but that I shall come to later. Thanks to the constant presence of consciousness as a background throughout the process of evolution, there was a corresponding evolution of consciousness itself in living beings also. Animals have a bit of this consciousness, and it operates in a limited way, largely via the sense-brain combination. The senses bring information to the brain from the outer world, and the brain then decides how the entity must act. Instructions then go from the brain to the body, and that is how the body responds to the commands of the brain. The point is that consciousness in animals is directed entirely outwards. When it comes to humans, the capacity for consciousness acquires an additional dimension. It helps the person to look inwards. That is what makes humans very special, and that is why Swami often says, Jantunam Narajanmam Durlabham. What it essentially means is that human birth is not only rare, but also most precious. So, if we look at the evolutionary process related to thinking, in animals it is very restricted and limited to matters concerned with the external world. In humans it's a very different affair. Humans can look outwards like the lower species do, but they can also look inwards, something that the lower species simply cannot do. In addition, the thinking capacity of humans is very powerful. That is why Krishna told Arjuna that among the senses, he is the mind. Swami says that the mind has two aspects, a lower aspect and a higher aspect. The terms lower and higher are in relation to spirituality and not in terms of thinking capacity. The lower mind is called Medha Shakti, and it shows up in many different and even wonderful ways. It is Medha Shakti that has helped man to be innovative and develop agriculture, to learn how to make metals and to use them, how to build houses where he could live, and so on. In due course, man's Medha Shakti became so sharp and advanced that he really began to advance by leaps and bounds. And thus it is that we have today so many advances in science and technology. Medha Shakti also made man very adventurous and prodded him to explore the world, climb mountains, go underwater, fly, and even go to the moon. Medha Shakti has also helped man to give expression to his artistic abilities via art, literature, drama, sculpture, music, architecture, and so on. If you think about it, Medha Shakti is all connected with man focusing more and more intently on the external world. Inevitably, this has also made man become an easy prey to various temptations that lurk in the external world, and thereafter succumb to anger, jealousy, and such other evil tendencies. Later, man's Medha Shakti also made him develop horrible weapons of war, making war so much more cruel and vicious. All this happens when knowledge and skill lack balance. That balance comes only when man turns to the higher mind, which we also call the heart. The heart is the seat of God, and it is from the heart that all virtues flow. The balance that I just mentioned comes only when the gates of heart are opened. That is when man's actions become virtuous, and that is when the divinity that is latent in man begins to shine. I shall tell you more about all this next time. For now, let us all realize that Medha Shakti, on which we rely all the time, is not enough by itself. No doubt, Meda Shakti can deliver great achievements, but it also heavily promotes the ego. And when ego takes over, man becomes spiritually blind and his buddhi becomes absolutely blunted. And that is when all troubles start. Which means that if we want to get out of the troubles created by the excessive use of Meda Shakti, then we have to look for something beyond. And that something is the heart, the seat of God. That we shall discuss next time. Meanwhile, take care and thanks for being with us. Jai Sai Ram. Sai Ram. You will recall that after presenting the Gita as a simplified dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, I started on the wrap-up with a general overview. And as a part of this process, in the last episode, I pointed out the following facts. 1. In creation, there first appeared the inanimate entities. 2. Later, life appeared on earth and slowly evolved from very primitive forms to more and more complex forms. 3. In the process, God gave animals a brain that permitted limited decision making related to survival. 4. In humans, the thinking capacity is manifested at two levels. First, there was a creative level called Meda Shakti, also referred to sometimes as the lower mind. The focus of the lower mind is almost entirely on the external world. 5. In addition, humans have a higher capability that helps on focusing on the inner world. This capacity, called the higher mind, helps man to look inwards and recognize the divinity latent within. 6. These two levels of thinking, the lower and the higher mind, together constitute what is often called the mind. 7. The so-called lower mind is all about Meda Shakti, while the higher mind is the fountainhead of all virtues. Buddhi is the pipeline that connects these two aspects of the mind, the lower mind and the higher mind. 8. In recent times, humans have become more and more materialistic and have forgotten all about morals. What it means is that the pipeline called Buddhi has become almost totally clogged and choked in most individuals. As a result, these days, the higher mind plays hardly any role in human affairs. I mean, how can water flow from a tank if the outlet pipe is clogged? 9. All this has created huge problems, most of which, in one manner or the other, are due to the mind. Those are the essential points I made last time. In the present episode, I would like to underscore some of the above points and add clarifying remarks as required. First, if you put together all that I just said, you would realize that a human being is made up of three distinct entities: the gross body, the lower mind or Meda Shakti, and the higher mind, also called the heart, the spiritual heart that is. The important point is that a human being is not just a gross body plus high-class Meda Shakti, as many today believe. On the contrary, the spiritual aspect of the human being, namely the heart, is equally important. And most unfortunately, it is the heart that is being increasingly ignored these days. That precisely is where the danger lies, and that indifference to the heart is also the source of most of our problems. Swami says that these days man is too much obsessed with the outer world. This is the result of Meda Shakti being in the driving seat, totally eclipsing Buddhi. Is it any wonder then that when the head dominates and the heart is shut out, there are problems galore? You may say, and rightly so, all that is fine. Right now we are stuck with huge problems. What's the solution? Well, leaders the world over are busy trying to find solutions. All sorts of committees have been set up to find solutions to various problems. Conferences are convened to discuss the problems and recommend what we ought to be doing. But none of these would really work. Do you know why? Because they do not go to the root of the problem. Well, what is it that one must do? Krishna gave the answer and Swami has explained it in great detail. Let's look at what Swami says. He says, "O man, you must first make a serious effort to know your true nature or self. You think you know who you are, but you do not. You assume your personality is defined by your position, your scholarship, your wealth, your status, etc. All these are concerned with your transient body. They add up to your lower self or ego. Your worldly personality certainly has meaning in relation to the external world. However, your true nature is the higher self that you try so hard to avoid noticing. It is your higher self that must define your personality, your feelings, your actions and duty. Then only would you be living life as God meant you to live." That's what Swami says. I should perhaps add that ego or the lower self dominates when the lower mind is allowed to dominate, while the higher self flowers when the heart is allowed expression. Swami makes it very simple by saying that our hands, our head and our heart must function in perfect harmony. It must all start with the heart. The heart is the seat of God, and from it must come good feelings. These noble feelings must then trigger good thoughts in the mind. The good thoughts of the mind must then manifest as good and sweet words spoken by the tongue and good and selfless actions performed by the body. If you think about this for a minute, you would realize that not only do the three entities that make up each one of us, namely the gross body, the subtle mind, and the heart, have a clear role to play, but also that there is a proper sequence and protocol according to which actions must be performed. In fact, Swami points out that this sequence is not only enshrined in the age-old Gayatri, but also acquires a profound meaning through it. Let us explore that. What does Gayatri say? Om Bhur Swaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Here there are three key words that form a part of the prayer to the Universal Mother. The key words are Bhur, Bhuvaha and Swaha. They represent the body, the mind and the soul. Swami says that the real meaning of Gayatri is just this. O loving Universal Mother, let pure love spring in my heart. Let this pure love trigger loving thoughts in my mind, and let these loving thoughts manifest as selfless acts of pure love by my body. Do you realize how simple this idea is? It has nothing to do with any particular faith. It is truly universal. That is why devotees of Baba chant it, no matter to what religion they belong. Krishna said that life is all about selfless duty. Swami explains that this duty must spring from pure love. If it does, then duty becomes truly divine. With the power of divinity behind it, actions based on pure love can help to solve the most difficult problem. The word impossible simply disappears. You don't believe? Well, let us just consider one problem and see how the Gayatri offers a solution. Before we start, we need to keep two things firmly in mind. Firstly, we must never forget to pray to our Universal Mother to help us. Anything we do must be undertaken only after remembering God and invoking divine blessings. Secondly, the path we must follow always is that of divine love. We are not going to ever question whether love would work or not. If we have the faith it would work, and we firmly believe in God, then God will surely make love work. But if we start hesitatingly, we might as well abandon the whole exercise. With that caveat, let us take a look at just one major problem of today: violence, conflict, terrorism, and even war. The question before us is, how can pure love help, if at all, in any way? Now, almost always, violence everywhere is born of anger. It all starts with anger, and when anger grows limitlessly, it becomes hatred. Sometimes anger itself is born of jealousy. If these three evil qualities, jealousy, anger, and hatred, combine, there sure can be all kinds of trouble. You may recall that right in the beginning, Krishna warns that once anger blinds a man, he is doomed to destruction. Not only that, he can drag a number of others also to suffering, pain, and misery. Century after century, how many times has humanity seen this happen again and again? Do you realize how much it costs to plan and inflict violence? But how much does it cost to smile and to serve? These days, the world spends so much money on developing sophisticated arms and ammunition. In fact, the big arms industries of the world make huge profits selling deadly arms and weapons. More money is then spent by the armies of the world to buy these weapons. Still more money is spent in using these guns, tanks, planes, ships, bombs and missiles to wage war and to cause widespread death and destruction. And after all this, what is gained? Only misery, pain and suffering. Is this the way to peace? Can the atom bomb really give us peace? Or is it love that would give us peace? Just consider what happened after World War II. There was a severe Cold War with the two then superpowers facing each other, each having tens of thousands of hydrogen bombs. And let me remind you, one hydrogen bomb is something like 100 times more powerful than the atom bomb dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. During the Cold War period, everyone everywhere lived in constant fear of an all-out nuclear war. And that threat disappeared only when some leaders decided that it was time to end this madness and limit nuclear weapons to at least some extent. Since then, many others have proposed that nuclear weapons must be banned completely and that all countries of the world without exception must renounce them totally. Unfortunately, the world is still wrapped too much in suspicion to understand how vital that renunciation is. I do not have time right now to go into all that, but if you think about it, you would realize that unless we learn to replace hate with love, there is little chance of solving the problems of the world. Long, long ago, ancients understood not only that love is important, but also that we must earnestly pray to Universal Mother to enlighten our hearts and unleash the love she has put in there. Before I sign off for today, I would like to briefly recall an incident that happened in 1968 during Swami's trip to Bombay that year. Swami had many engagements, and in one of these, he was asked by some intellectuals, Baba, some people say India is facing a lot of external threats and must therefore develop the atom bomb to guarantee her safety. What are your comments? Swami smiled and replied, among the Pandavas, Arjuna was much more skilled as an archer than his elder brother Dharmaja. Arjuna was also better informed about the world. As for the mighty Bhima, he was not only towering in appearance, but when it came to sheer physical strength, Dharmaja was nowhere compared to this younger brother of his. Now, there were all these 5 brothers, each with a particular skill of his own. And in that department, every brother outshone the eldest brother Dharmaja. But you know what? Every one of the younger brothers bowed respectfully to Dharmaja and obeyed his commands. And do you know why? Because Dharmaja represented Dharma. Among the committee of nations, America is like Arjuna and Russia is like Bhima. India must be like Dharmaja, the voice of Dharma in the world. In the end, Dharma is supreme. And if India follows the path of Dharma, all nations would respect India and accept its moral leadership. In such a situation, India does not need atom and hydrogen bombs. They become meaningless. That's what Swami said then. I personally believe that even today, India must take the leadership to help humanity to move towards a world without atom bombs and hydrogen bombs, and provide the moral leadership needed to achieve that. Maybe you do not quite accept that, but I assure you that if you chant the Gayatri often enough, you would be definitely convinced of the power of pure love. So, how about ending this with the chant of the Gayatri?
तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् भूर्भुवस्सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्
Sai Ram, and welcome to this series on the Gita presented as a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna. this is the last episode and maybe I should devote this to making some concluding remarks. This I shall do largely by quoting Bhagwan Baba. However, as a preliminary, let me reiterate the following. 1. We must have the firm belief that pure love can solve almost any problem. 2. We must in addition realize that this bank of pure love has a branch office within our own hearts. So, we do not have to go looking for it here and there. 3. And God is right there in our hearts, 24/7, waiting for us to call and ever ready to help. Our big problem is that we hardly believe in all this, even though Swami keeps on repeating this ever so often. Again and again, Bhagwan Baba tells us, you are actually God in human form. Divinity is at the very core of your personality. The trouble is that you have greater belief in the external casing, namely your body, rather than what is inside, namely your Atma. Suppose there is an iron safe with precious diamonds inside. A person seeing the safe and who does not know what is inside would merely say, this is an iron safe. But a person who knows what is inside would say, this is an iron safe with diamonds inside. We believe we are merely human because we are deluded by the external form and refuse to look inside. Once we believe we are at best only human, our capacity to do things would also be restricted. But once we realize our latent divinity, it would be like plugging into a power source with infinite volts. Why is pure love so powerful? Where from does love get its power? The short answer is, pure love is most powerful because love is God. Let us spend a few minutes trying to understand that. And this I shall do by drawing attention to many of the things that Swami has stated. By the way, I shall be actually quoting Swami so that you are convinced that what I am saying is not something cooked up by me. Okay, let me start by reminding you what Swami says about our composite nature, namely that the human being is really a 3-in-1 made up of the body, the mind and the Atma.
Quote, to comprehend the unity of body, mind and Atma, the spirit, is to realize a fundamental truth. The body is gross. The Atma is subtle. It is the mind that links the two. If the Atma is ignored, man is reduced to the level of the animal. When the body and the Atma are ignored and the mind alone is active, the humanness comes to the fore. When the body and the mind are kept out and the Atma alone is experienced, divinity is attained. End of quote.
Every second of our lives must be spiritual. This is how Swami puts it.
Quote, it is the Atma principle that sustains the body and all the senses. When the Atma leaves the body, neither the sense organs nor the mind can function. The Atma is eternal and omnipresent. It is self-existent. The spiritual quest is to understand and realize the nature of the Atma. Every individual should regard the enquiry into the nature of the Atma as the primary purpose of life. Purity of thought, word and deed is essential for this enquiry. End of quote.
The Atma is also referred to as universal consciousness. Swami relates this universal consciousness to dharma as follows.
Quote, people regard dharma, or right conduct, as merely ethical conduct in daily life. But this is not so. Dharma really means recognition of the universal consciousness that is in each individual and act on the basis of the unity of that consciousness. When the divine nature of this consciousness is realized, it is transformed into Atma Dharma, the Dharma of this self. True Dharma is the realization of the unity of the Omni-Self. End of quote.
Baba says that man is not able to realize that he is the Atma because of attachment. People often blame others and the world for this attachment. This is wrong, as Swami points out.
Quote, what binds is attachment. It is not family life that binds you. It has no arms to clasp you. It is you who are holding on to the worldly life and suffering the consequences. This is the truth in the false and the unreality in the real. This accounts for the fact that in the world today, the false is deemed true and the truth is considered as untrue. End of quote.
Swami says that the mind tricks us and makes us develop attachment and infatuation for the things of the external world. Infatuation breeds ego, greed and selfishness, all of which are the starting point of trouble in a big way. God sends man into the world with pure love, but something happens in the world. What is that? Swami explains.
Quote, in this mundane world, love assumes external forms. When pure gold is given to the goldsmith for making a jewel, he mixes copper and other metals with it, and thereby its value is reduced. Likewise, because pure love is mixed with worldly attachments, it gets tainted. But when such tainted love is directed towards seva or service, it gets purified. End of quote.
How does one attain purity? Swami has the answer.
Quote, purity of the mind calls for total elimination of attachments and aversions from the mind. Hatred and envy should have no place. Today, people are filled with hatred and envy. They cannot bear to see others happy or prosperous. This is a sign of a polluted mind. One should cultivate the large-heartedness to return good for evil and not to cause pain to anyone in any circumstance. This is a mark of a pure mind. End of quote.
No magic is required to achieve purity. Work that we all can do itself can be a stepping stone to purity. How? Here is the answer.
Quote, each and every moment should be spent in the contemplation of God. You may think, if every moment is spent in the contemplation of God, how is it possible to do our work? Do not distinguish between your work and God's work. Your work is God's work because you too are God. It is a mistake to think that all that you do in the prayer hall is God's work and outside it is your work. You should not entertain such feelings of separateness. Consider that your heart is the altar of God and turn your vision inward. One who understands this truth and acts accordingly is a true human being. End of quote.
Our real problem is that we waste a lot of our time. This is what the Gita refers to as inaction in action. Swami says that time waste is life waste. He adds,
Quote, all the 24 hours, all the days of life, men are active in worshipping their bodies and minds, catering to the senses, submitting to the clamor of carnal desires, earning the wherewithal to feed themselves. They have no time to spare for meditation on God. How can men secure peace of mind when they have no contact with the vast, the timeless, the almighty providence? When God is last, life is lost. End of quote.
People have all kinds of wrong notions about spirituality and think of every excuse to avoid spirituality. Baba corrects this impression. He says,
Quote, today, people think that spirituality has no relation to mundane life and vice versa. This is a big mistake. True divinity is a combination of spirituality and social obligations. National unity and social harmony are founded upon spirituality. It is the divine that links spirituality and social existence. The Creator and the Prakriti, cosmos, are inextricably associated with each other. Hence, God should not be regarded as separate from the creation. See God in the cosmos. End of quote.
Baba further points out the intimate connection between the individual, society, nature and God as follows.
Quote, the individual, the society and the nation constitute an inextricably linked organism. The peace and welfare of the nation depends on the peace and progress of the society, which in turn are dependent on the peace and good conduct of individuals. Unless individuals develop mutual regard and tolerance and cultivate equal-mindedness towards each other, there can be no peace and harmony in the community. Material progress alone cannot bring about peace, harmony and happiness among people. End of quote.
Baba further adds that nature is actually the body of God. If only humans understand that, would all the pollution we see today ever occur? Let us hear Swami on this.
Quote, man has the rare good fortune of adoring nature as the body of God and offering grateful worship to God. But is he conscious of God being the source and sustenance? Does he give God the first place in his thoughts, which is his due? Or is he engaged in the activities of life in total disregard of God? It is a pity that instead of paying attention to God, nature and man in that order, men today are concerned most with themselves, more with nature and very much less with God. From birth to death, from dawn till night, man pursues fleeting pleasures by the exploitation, the despoiling, the desecration of nature, ignoring the truth that it is the property of God, the Creator, and any injury caused to it is a sacrilege which merits dire punishment. End of quote.
Krishna told Arjuna that man must understand his place in creation and make sacrifice the cornerstone of his life. Swami also says the same.
Quote, it is only when the individual is prepared to sacrifice his selfish desires and toil for the welfare of society, that the nation will prosper. Then only will the world have peace. That is why the Vedas proclaim that man can have peace only when he renounces selfish desires. The Vedas express disapproval of persons who accumulate wealth and who are ever immersed in activities that can add to their physical comfort. The man who gives receives, even while he gives, more than what he gives. End of quote.
Giving goes hand in hand with compassion. In conventional parlance, compassion is what one person feels for another in great pain or distress. That's a good starting point, no doubt. But the spirit of giving goes much farther, as Swami explains.
Quote, Daya or compassion is not mere display of kindness or sympathy to someone in distress. It calls for complete identification with the suffering experienced by another and reliving that suffering as a means of relieving the agony experienced by oneself. When any service or help is rendered to anyone, this is the spirit in which it should be done. You must feel that you are helping yourself when you are helping another. End of quote.
Some people think spirituality is all about the heart. True, the heart is important. But let us not forget that God did not give the body without a purpose. It is the body that exists in the physical world and has a key role to play. Let us hear Swami on this subject.
Quote, The body is a house given to you on rent. The owner is God. Live there as long as He wills, thanking Him and paying Him the rent of faith and devotion. End of quote.
Swami makes it all so simple. It all boils down to pure love or selfless love or divine love, call it what you will. This is what he says.
Quote, Love is the easiest path. Just as you can see the moon only with the light of the moon, God, who is the embodiment of love, can be reached through love. Regard love as your life breath. Love was the first quality to emerge in the creative process. All other qualities came after it. Therefore, fill your hearts with love and base your life on it. End of quote.
Love is the compass that must guide our lives.
Quote, Love is like the mariner's compass, which always points to the north. At any time, any place or in any circumstance, love points only towards God. When love is directed towards God, it becomes pure, selfless, enduring and divine. End of quote.
Of course, we must remember that when Swami says that love must be directed towards God, it means, among other things, that we must see God in all, in society and in nature also.
Quote, There is nothing greater on earth than love. Anything can be accomplished through love. Therefore, make every effort to promote love. True devotion transcends the limitations imposed by one's daily routines and the obligations of life. Love for the divine should be present in any situation. Strive to cultivate such love and experience the joy of sharing it with others. End of quote.
The bottom line is faith and love.
Quote. For achieving anything in life, two things are essential: firm faith and pure love. If you develop love of God, that love will banish all sorrow and evil tendencies like attachment, anger and envy. End of quote.
Well, that brings me to the end of this series. The Bhagavad Gita might appear very difficult for ordinary people to understand. However, Swami has made it very simple. He says, do your duty, do it seeing God everywhere, do it with love and offer it to God. If we here in Radio Sai have succeeded in communicating that to you, then we would have done our duty. Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Jai Sai Ram.